In Chapter 8, we're going to learn how to describe things that happened in the past, or things that have been, actually, probably the more accurate would be, a way to say it would be things that have been completed already, completed actions. And we're going to learn how to use the particle le. This is going to be a lengthy video because the way to use the dynamic particle le is extremely complicated. We're actually going to learn just one way to use le in this lesson. So if you understand or you don't and you have a pretty good grasp on how le is used, feel free to skip around in the video. Otherwise, if you don't understand, it might be helpful to watch the entire thing. So le is something that we call a particle, meaning it's not necessarily a verb or an adverb. It's something that only exists for grammatical purposes. In this case, we can actually call it a so-called aspect particle. Now, I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but feel free to look at the other resources to find out more about aspect particles. But essentially, Chinese does not have a verb tense. For example, in English, I can say, I walk, present tense. I walked, past tense. I will walk, future tense. Chinese doesn't really have these sorts of things. Chinese has something called an aspect, meaning instead of saying I walked, you would say I have walked. I have walked is something, this past progressive in English is a so-called aspect. And aspects are a little bit different from tenses. Basically, the way you can think about le is that instead of saying it's happening, action is happening in the past, you want to say an action was completed. So you can really define le as a so-called also completion particle. All right, you can call it either aspect particle or a completion particle, meaning it's used after it's used to signify that an action has been finished. Now, something can be completed in the past, but it can also be completed in the future. For example, I will have walked tomorrow. You can also use, that's an aspect, and you can also use le in that situation. Let us look at some actual examples of le. 做了 verb plus a particle le. To do plus le, you can translate it as I did it. Or really, probably the most accurate translation is grammatically is I have done it. Did you do, or have you done your homework? Yes, I have done it. 做了. Similarly, I can say 看了, I have seen something. 见了, I have met something. 去了, I have gone somewhere. Like, what did you do on the weekend, right? Where did you go? 你周末去做了什么? And I might say, this weekend that already happened, 我这个周末去跳舞了. I went to dance, or I have done dancing this weekend. Let's look at some more examples in sentence context. 昨天晚上你去打球了吗? So yesterday night, did you go and did you have this action of playing ball? And the answer is 对，昨天晚上我去打球了. Again, le is a little different from past tense. It's not necessarily happening in the past, but when things are happening in the past, when you're narrating or you're talking about past events, things that have already happened, you do want to use le, because those are all actions are all completed. And you can think about it in terms of past tense, but be aware grammatically it's a little bit different. Because le can also indicate an action or occurrence or completion of an action in the future. Another nuance with le is where in the sentence do you put it? And this is a little tricky because it really depends on whether the verb follows an object or not. Generally speaking, you can always put the le right after the verb. You can never go wrong with putting an aspect particle right after a verb. However, if there's an object, meaning a verb object, sometimes the le can go after the object, except in the situation where there's the object is being modified, in which case you would again return to put the le after the verb. This sounds a little complicated, and it is in some ways, but generally speaking, the rule is you can never go wrong if you put the le right after the verb. You can always put it between the verb and the object. No worries. Though it's pretty common to also put it after a verb object. Let's look at some examples. Verb plus le can be used with a verb object after the verb object or between the verb object when the object is specific, meaning it's modified by a number, an adjective, etc. Okay, so if there's no modifier for the object, the le goes, generally speaking, after the verb and the object. For example, 昨天晚上你去打球了吗? And here we have the verb 打 and the object 球, right? 打球了, and then the le goes after the verb object because there is no modifier. So again, like that verb object construct we've learned before, like 打球, 跳舞, 唱歌, 睡觉, all of these things can be followed with le. Now, what happens if I just move the le here and put it right after the verb? 昨天晚上你去打了球吗? Is that grammatically wrong? Not really. Very common expression. You can say that. No worries. But you all will probably see it more often this way because that's a habit that people have. Right? 打球了, verb object plus le. What if there is a modifier, however? For example, the object is something like 晚饭, all right? So it's not just 吃饭, the verb object. It's what kind of 饭? 吃晚饭. Right, so you have this modifier. It's actually a meal in the evening. Then you want to put le right after the verb. Right. 明天我吃了晚饭去看电影. By the way, this is an example of le in the future because you're talking about something that's going to happen, and when the action is completed in the future, then something else will happen. So tomorrow, after I will have eaten dinner, then I'll go watch a movie. All right, so that's the difference between le and past tense, strictly speaking. All right, some other examples of verb plus le plus modifier plus object are 喝了2杯, all right, I drank 2 cups, or 喝了1杯水, I drank 1 cup of water. All right, so the rule here for the so-called completion le particle is, the very technical rule is use le after a verb, if there's no object, of course. Use le after a verb plus object if it's that special verb object structure where the object doesn't have a modifier. And if there is a modifier, you want to always, and then you want to just put the le back right after the verb and put the le between the verb and the object. All right, and that's our lesson for the day. 谢谢大家。